Father Calabasas passed the background check, and on Saturday night he wasn't getting ready for Mass in the morning, but he was sawing off the barrel of his newly purchased double-barrel shotgun. There was a bandolier of shells hung up on the wall, while statuettes of Mary held their arms out wide, as if shrugging in surprise. While sawing off the barrel of his new shotgun, he thought of that comment Milton made about an orangutan using a saw. The sound of the saw teeth biting into the barrel filled his office while he worked by candlelight. The barrel toppled onto the floor and let out a hollow clang that was similar to the bells. Father Calabasas held up the sawed-off shotgun and examined it, examining how the orange candlelight reflected on its black barrel. "I dub thee Little Flock," he told the shotgun. He then turned around to the lever-action rifle and considered sawing off the buttstock and barrel as well, but was unsure. It was a Marlin Model 336, and he had already decided to name it David, after the David and Goliath story. Had anybody ever pitied the giant? This he contemplated while babysitting his new purchases in his office. He remembered how urgently the black silhouette rang the bells. It gave him a sense of dread, but also a sense of pity. It was a sense of sympathy. Was it a sense of sympathy? This thing, it reminded him of the abominable snowman from the 1964 Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer film. He used to watch it every Christmas when he was a boy in his snowy village, and the abominable snowman always frightened him greatly. Father Calabasas trekked into Lynn Woods the following Sunday afternoon. Milton wore a Davy Crockett hat with a raccoon tail attached to it. He also wore a beige safari uniform with the pants tucked down into his combat boots. Father Calabasas wore his black cassock. He looked as ghoulish as always, but he looked alert. "Ah!" Milton yelped when Father Calabasas drew Little Flock from within his cassock. Luckily, he did this while they were deep enough within the Lynn Woods. "Do you have any idea how illegal that is?" Milton asked, but Father Calabasas didn't care. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," Father Calabasas quoted, but this did not assuage Milton at all. "Did you not bring a gun, my friend?" "A gun?" Milton squealed. "Yes. Don't you use one of those revolvers when tiptoeing around your alligators?" "Yes, but that is in South Carolina. I have a revolver, not a sawed-off shotgun. We aren't Bonnie and Clyde, Tobias." "I believe he used a sawed-off rifle, but his sweetheart used a sawed-off 20-gauge. That's not the point," Milton squeaked. "We have a Gigantopithecus to catch, Milton. This is for protection," Father Calabasas said. Milton looked to his side to see the priest cradling the shotgun in his arms, the way someone might carry a little lapdog against his chest. "There's an old legend about pirates who buried treasure in these woods, Doctor," Father Calabasas mused, amongst the crunching of his footsteps. "They say he died in an earthquake. Thus, the term Dungeon Rock is now a sort of tourist attraction in the woods." Dungeon Rock. It's a stony crevice in the earth underneath a wedge of boulder, Father Calabasas went on. "I know about this only because a youngster I befriended used to crawl into the crevice to shoot up. It's dark and damp. A real den down there it is." "Have you been down there before?" "I did. I went with the youngster one night to go and collect her discarded needles when she finally decided to turn over a new leaf. I tell you this in confidence, of course, but I am proud of her, and this forest brings up memories. She studies at the North Shore Community College now. Oh, but I haven't seen her in a while." Milton simply listened to the priest while they walked. In fact, the more they walked, the more they remembered their friendship, and the less they remembered the Gigantopithecus. They laughed about the first debate they had had at Cambridge. Their friendship was built off of disagreement, but also a kind of respect for each other. They both knew that the other possessed a propensity for learning. It was what they talked about while Milton put vinegar on his fish and chips and Father Calabasas dipped his fries in tartar sauce. "Oh, I love tartar sauce," Father Calabasas moaned as the two scaled the hill in the woods that led to Dungeon Rock. Milton threw his hands up as the two stopped. The gesture made Father Calabasas regret his wild profession of love for tartar sauce, but the forest didn't move. No crows flew away, but they remained in the branches where the sun had beaten through in lime-colored flakes. "Do you see this, Tobias?" Milton whispered, while reaching into a tuft of long orange hair. He grabbed the tuft as gently as he could and pulled it out of the tree bark like wool. "The hair of a Gigantopithecus," Father Calabasas gasped. Milton put the tuft of hair up to his nose and sniffed. "The sample is fresh," he said, snapishly. "Look around for prints or more tufts of hair." Father Calabasas started doing so, but the earth was too dry for prints, and they were in the hills near Dungeon Rock, so there was too much gravel within the dirt. He unfolded his arms and drew his shotgun while the two crept into the opening in the forest where Dungeon Rock was. "There it is," Father Calabasas said. "The entrance to Dungeon Rock. I don't think the species could squeeze in there." "But we can," Father Calabasas said, gripping Milton's arm when the Gigantopithecus emerged out of the trees. How yellow were its eyes, its face, a purpley bruised visage. It opened its mouth and roared, displaying yellow canine teeth and flinging spit into the air. Father Calabasas pulled Milton into the entrance of Dungeon Rock, just as the Gigantopithecus swiped at the two of them. They nearly tumbled down the wooden stairs and would have been digested by the dark stomach of Dungeon Rock, but Father Calabasas caught himself. He held on to both Milton and his shotgun. The two caught their breath while listening to the agitated breathing of the Gigantopithecus. Its breathing amplified into a hoot and then into a shriek. Very little sunlight leaked into the stairway in Dungeon Rock while the two sat listening. They mastered their footsteps on the stairs, intaking the primal odor of the Gigantopithecus while it continued to complain in discordant hoots and shrieks above the entrance to Dungeon Rock. They could smell its breath, and it smelled like swampy pond water. Its body odor was doggy, almost as pungent as a cow. They reminisced about its arms. Oh, its biceps. Had it indeed grabbed a hold of Milton, there was no telling what would have been done to the paleontologist. They must have hunkered down in the stairway for 20 minutes while waiting for the beast to amble away. Oh, and the heartbreak Father Calabasas felt while replaying the scene in his head. Although the species had perhaps tried to do something significant by ringing the bells, it simply could not be allowed to. Those were not its bells to ring. Such thoughts ran through Father Calabasas' mind while he held on to his friend and his little shotgun. "Tomorrow night, Milton," he whispered, "we must bring the Gigantopithecus to its end." "Tobias, you must understand. We caught it off guard." "It's too dangerous," the priest hissed in a whisper, his voice being carried down the stairwell of Dungeon Rock. "How angry it was when we entered its domain today. How angry will it be when our Lord doesn't answer to its baying at the bells? What rampage will be sent into when it's denied by God? Then it will truly become the ape that it was always meant to be." The ending notes of the priest's mini-speech echoed down the stairway, being carried down into the dark stomach of Dungeon Rock. "Then it will truly be the ape it was always meant to be. To be. Milton took a deep breath through his nose. He was too frightened, even still. "It will ransack the streets of Lynn," the priest hissed. "It will overrun vehicles. It will turn its victims' skulls into bells." Milton was too abhorred to speak. The plan was simple. Milton was stationed in the bell tower, while Father Calabasas waited at the altar with his shotgun and lever action. All the candles in the church along the pillars were lit, with the altar being the most lit area of the church. He was curious, the plan also acting as an experiment, for there was a plate of communion wafers and a goblet of red wine on the altar. Would the Gigantopithecus accept the Eucharist? Did the Gigantopithecus perhaps, on some level, possess a misty understanding of ceremony? Father Calabasas wanted to know. The father flinched at the first tolling of the bell. He blinked and reminded himself of his mission. He looked down the long aisle between the pews, looking out the church's open door and imagining it would be big enough for the Gigantopithecus to crawl through. He swallowed his dread and kept his eyes on the doorway as another tolling sounded. He imagined how scared his friend was, but he reminded himself again that this mad idea had a purpose. For some time, Father Calabasas listened to the bells from above. They weren't ringing the way the Gigantopithecus had rung them. They clanged more meekly, not as urgently. The bells ceased. Silence fell upon Lynn. Father Calabasas retained his composure when the thing came in from the street. It crawled up the marble steps outside and bowed its head while crawling to fit through the doorway. But it got on its two hind feet when it entered the aisle. It was no longer just a split-second episode in Linwood. It was no longer a silhouette. The Gigantopithecus stood there, yards away from the priest. Father Calabasas inhaled as calmly as he could through his nose and tried his best not to show emotion while sharing eye contact with the Gigantopithecus. Its yellow eyes seemed wetted by the candlelight, its woolly coat of orange hair covering its body aside from a plate of purple muscle on its front side. Its mouth and nose had a protruding nature. It looked alarmingly more like a human than an orangutan. Oh, but it was so unnaturally tall. It looked alarmed to see the priest, or was that its natural visage? Father Calabasas tried to keep his hands from shaking while he picked up and offered the plate of communion wafers in the air, which now was a battle of scents of the Gigantopithecus and the warm scent of the candles. "The body of Christ," he murmured, in a voice he hoped only God could hear. The Gigantopithecus just stared blankly at him. Was there some kind of recognition in its yellow eyes? "Is this what you want, Father Calabasas?" asked the Gigantopithecus. But it didn't answer. This didn't mean yes, but it didn't mean no either. "If it is, I'll bring it to you in the woods every Sunday evening." The Gigantopithecus didn't understand this either. It blinked and sniffed the air while looking at the priest dead on. It cleared its throat in a low grumble and curled back its lip in perhaps some kind of an attempt at communication. It sniffed the air further, and somehow Father Calabasas knew it was trying to smell the communion wafers. Was there a sense of familiarity being tied to the air between them? The Gigantopithecus stepped forward, beginning its descent down the aisle. Father Calabasas kept the plate of communion wafers in front of him and waited. "The body of Christ," he repeated in a voice that was clearer than earlier. He gulped. The Gigantopithecus was extending out its long arm. It was actually reaching for the plate, and it made Father Calabasas' heart throb so much that he could have smiled. The Gigantopithecus swatted the plate out of Father Calabasas' hand. The air was a glitter of communion wafers for a second, while the plate clanged to the floor. It roared while diving at the altar. Father Calabasas ducked just in time and grabbed his shotgun. He crawled away from the altar while the Gigantopithecus turned around. The shotgun blasted out a tolling of its own. The Gigantopithecus roared in anger, but the buckshot had created little violent polka dots along the side of its purple chest. It closed its eyes and continued roaring. Father Calabasas fired a second time. He could hear the flesh being ripped off its shoulder when the buckshot splashed across the air. His whole body trembled while unlocking the shotgun and letting the barrel down. The thing was charging at him. He dove into a pew before he could reload Little Flock. The shotgun shells which he held went rolling away, rolling down another pew and another. The creature's fists shot down and cracked one of the pew benches in two. Boards and splinters erupted into the air. Father Calabasas climbed over a pew, catching a glimmering brass shell on the floor. He picked it up, shoved it into the shotgun, and flipped the barrel back up. The Gigantopithecus regained its footing just in time and brought both its fists up with the vigor of an executioner's beheading axe. Father Calabasas pulled his finger down on all the triggers all the way. The Gigantopithecus threw its head back immediately when its forehead caught the brunt of the buckshot. It had been so close to Father Calabasas that its head had caught every ball in the volley of the round. Its deflating roar came in conjunction with the wet crack its skull made. Father Calabasas watched the Gigantopithecus make one final expression while it fell down backwards. Its mouth was open as if it wanted to let out a final hoot, a final prayer. The church echoed with the thud its falling body made. Father Calabasas panted while watching streams exit gracefully out of the wedge at the top of its forehead. The wound reminded him of the entrance to Dungeon Rock. Milton hurried into the church while Father Calabasas watched the violent liquid pooling out of the Gigantopithecus's skull. "Thank God you're all right," Milton said, sounding like he was breathing for the first time. "'Tis quite the time to thank God," Father Calabasas said, while turning around to face his friend. "Did it reach for the communion wafers?" "There was a moment where I thought it was," Father Calabasas answered, matter-of-factly. He held the shotgun out limply, now that it was empty, suddenly remembered he was holding it, and was startled by it. "Oh," he laughed, "I better go hide this before the police arrive." "Yes, you better," Milton murmured. He was a bit astonished at his friend's resilience, or was it a lack of surprise? It made him start to wonder if his friend had actually performed the rites of exorcism before. Part of him really didn't want to know. Gunshots aren't the most abnormal thing in this part of the world, but they're very abnormal from inside St. Mary's, so the residents surrounded the church and notified the authorities. "Gunshots?" Father Calabasas said to the police officer, while Milton was finishing dragging the Gigantopithecus's body down into the church basement. The priest was stalling the cops on the front steps outside the church. "You know, now that you mention it, a loud noise did wake me from my nap, but there might be mice in the church rafters. Don't tell anybody. By the way, do you know any good exterminators, Your Honor?" They had used ropes to pull and drag the behemoth primitive along the floor until they let it tumble down the basement steps. Milton wanted to bring it back with him to South Carolina for further study without the pesky government involving itself, but there was something that unnerved him about the Gigantopithecus, even though it was dead. It picked at his mind and turned his consciousness into a scab while he stood over the woolly orange body of the thing, Father Calabasas distracting the police outside. An ape that as Father Calabasas had stated, presented an act of desperate spiritualism. Was Milton's heart breaking, or was his mindset evolving against itself while he loomed over the body of the Gigantopithecus? He certainly had never scaled any religious buildings to ring a bell. He couldn't remember any time in his life where he was enthralled in an act of desperate spiritualism, but this ancient ape was. So, Milton and Father Calabasas readied the body for the remaining hours of darkness that came after midnight. He got a rental car when the sun came up, and the two struggled transporting the cadaver into the rental car. They shook hands, and Milton drove away, besides a couple of incidences on the highway where Milton felt the car was going to lift forward into the air to balance out the 1,000 pounds of ape in the back. The commute went smoothly. He spent a couple of days transporting the body in his homemade lab near the alligator farm. He spent even more dissecting and preserving the body, but it was when he got to the head that a familiar fear entered him, and it led him to call his old friend in Lynn, Massachusetts, in an act of desperate spiritualism. You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. DoctorPlague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. DoctorPlague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.